Back to today's video. Today is Sunday, August 24th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about Michigan's governor race in the 2026 midterm elections. I realized in my last video where I talked about Michigan and how the gloves were off as Democrats and the Democratic Party chair announced that if you were to endorse a candidate that was not the Democratic nominee, that the Democratic Party of Michigan would rescind access to Democrats across the state looking to run for re-election from their party database, from their voting, all of these different things, to essentially say that this 2026 midterm election is not one where you can deviate and you must lock in on the midterm cycle. Now, lost in that, I think, was, we talked about it a bit, but I wanted to really make a dedicated video talking about the competitive nature of Michigan's governor race, which might stand to be one of the closest races of the 2026 cycle, and one that certainly deserves a lot more national attention, especially from the Democratic Party. To sort of level set where we are in the Michigan governor's race, this race is shaping up to be a three-way race. Yes, you heard that correctly, a three-way race in the day and age where there are two mainstream political parties. The Michigan governor's race might end up being one where about a third of the vote goes to each of the respective candidates, Republicans, Democrats, and an independent mayor. The mayor of Detroit, Mike Duggan, who endorsed Kamala Harris in the last election, had been elected, every election as a Democrat up until recently when he decided to switch political parties, is now running for governor as an independent, someone who he says that he's relying on partisan fatigue in the midterm elections in 2026 as an opportunity to win in the 2026 cycle. Now, this has sort of really thrown Democrats for a loop, given that Mike Duggan, again, was elected as mayor as a Democrat and only switched political parties because he does not believe that he would make it through a general or a primary to the general election. Mike Duggan, who has been in this position since 2014, a popular mayor in the city of Detroit, near universal name ID in the city, not as much on the outskirts and periphery of the major city, but Mike Duggan stands to be a formidable roadblock and obstacle for Democrats in this state, as he does come from a traditionally Democratic background. Not to mention, too, that Michigan, as a state that Donald Trump won in the last election, already stands to be a state the Democrats are a bit worried about in the 2026 midterms. I talked to you about the Senate race probably a week ago about how the Michigan Senate race really was never meant to be this competitive, and yet here we are, going into the full swing of the 26th cycle, and Michigan Senate race might end up being closer than some other states that Democrats are going to invest far more money in. And that's because Michigan is a sleeper state for Democrats. While Democrats have historically gotten lucky in this state, Joe Biden did only win it by 2.8%. It has fallen far from glory insofar that it has not voted for the Democratic Party by the the margins that it had under Obama, now reaching to a point where today, under the day and age of Trump and the modern day GOP and Democratic Party, that Michigan has been a little bit more reluctant, in voting for the Democratic Party. And thinking about the 2026 midterms, Democrats were hoping that it would be this cycle that really reels back in that Democratic support, the same support that ushered in Democrats with a massive victory in 2022, a victory in 2018, victories across the state. The Democrats won the state secretary of state race, the attorney general's race, the governor's race, the Senate races. 2018 and 2022 were arguably quite favorable to these respective Democrats in the midterm cycles, even if 2022 wasn't all great for Democrats on the national level. But 2026 might end up being way more trickier, with Mike Duggan being the former Democrat turned independent from a major city. You have to ask, what is this doing? Well, when you take a look at where Kamala Harris received the most votes out of any county, it came from the county that contains the city of Detroit. Wayne County voted overwhelmingly in favor of Kamala Harris. She won 63% of the vote in the state. And keep in mind, she still lost the election in the state of Michigan. But it was Wayne County that provided her 500,000 votes. Without it, she would have been at 2.2 million. Trump, on the other hand, would have been at 2.6 million. The margin in percentage would have expanded to around 3, 4, 5% across the state, but instead, it was less than 1.5 points. And that's because Wayne County, as much as it did not land Kamala Harris the presidency or a victory in Michigan, is a big reason she was even competitive. So when Mike Duggan comes into this and pulls away massive, vote shares from the Democratic Party, it makes it very difficult for Democrats to see how they have a pathway to victory. In 2022, the 2018 is probably a better example, but in 2022, the ratings here were tilt Democrat, lean Democrat. The worst was Real Clear Politics, which we know how they lean on things, as a toss-up. 2018, very similarly, pretty strong for the Democratic Party. But in 2026, which is shaping up to be a year that supposedly is meant to be better for Democrats than 2022, Michigan's race, toss-up, battleground, toss-up, toss-up. And that's because the data tells us exactly what we knew, that the Democratic Party vote share is dragged down tremendously. Gretchen Whitmer won this governor's race by about 11 points and did so by outspending the Republicans and having a unified Democratic backing. 55% of voters in the state of Michigan backed Gretchen Whitmer for governor. In 2026, in a multi-way race, Jocelyn Benson is peaking at 42% with data going back to February, and in May, 35 and 38%. Not exactly the best place you want to be. And Republicans have their nominee, John James, who stands to be the most likely to win in the state's Republican primary. I imagine that he will be in the best position. He's raised, similarly nearly the same amount of money as Mike Cox. And taking a look, too, at where we are, John James leads in the polls. He's doing well. Voters like him. They want to elect him. And he's been in this position, has ran statewide before, has the name ID. The point is, that could be a problem. That could be a problem for the Democratic Party as they look to the 26 midterms. Because this race, above all, should not be one that Democrats should even have to worry about. If they won in 2018 by 10 and they won in 2022 by more, the chances are that this race really shouldn't be that competitive. And Democrats might see that there are people out there who argue, okay, maybe Jocelyn Benson, who right now I believe is the front runner in this race, but no guarantee that's happening. She just leads tremendously in the data, so closer to a guarantee than not. But my point is nothing around that. It is about the fact that she has an electoral history. She's not someone who's coming into this with no statewide victories, not a notable name. In 2018, she was elected Secretary of State. We can actually get to the margin here if you want to take a look. 2022 is arguably more impressive, which, again, given the circumstances of the year, should not have been that case. But again, to speak to the fact that she is in a good position. In 2018, Jocelyn Benson won by about 9 points. 4 years later, when the national environment shifted from Democrat +8 to Republican +3, Michigan got bluer in this race. Jocelyn Benson won by about 14 points. She's a big name and not for no reason. Voters like her, they respect her, and they want to vote for her, but in 2026, they don't have an immediate answer. And that's because the data tells us that Mike Duggan pulls directly, yes, from Republican vote shares too, but arguably, if Democrats are coming off from +10 and +12 margins in 2018 and 2022 respectively, and Jocelyn Benson's leading by a point in 2026, Mike Duggan is certainly pulling more from the Democratic Party. And that's because the national environment is meant to be much more Democratic than it was in 2024. Donald Trump won because the national environment was overwhelmingly in favor of the Republican Party. But now, in 2026, we're expecting the national popular vote to swing from +1.5% for Trump. Michigan actually is the state that was most aligned in terms of actual vote share and voting percentage in favor of Trump as the national popular vote. But that Democrats would swing it to at least a 4-point popular vote victory, maybe even more. Because in 2018, they won the national popular vote by nearly 8.5 points. So thinking about that, thinking about near a 9-point margin, you could see drastic swings. And if Michigan is indicative of the rest of the nation, Democrats, by every metric, are actually underperforming in this data. Because Democrats should be lockstep. Mike Duggan, again, is a former Democrat and pulls more away from a liberal and leftist base that, quite frankly, John James has no appeal to. 2026 would be an easier pathway, too, because it isn't just the governor's race that is at stake. It is the Senate race that is coinciding with this governor's race the Democrats look to and say they're not in a tremendous position either. The data is suggesting that it's a close race no matter what, and everyone rates it as a toss-up. The 2018 Senate race, however, if you take a look at what was happening in the state of Michigan, you're going to find that it was that 2018 Senate race that was overwhelming in favor of the Democratic Party. And a big reason as to why that happened and why it was even possible was because the circumstances of the year allowed it to be that way. Let's take a look. The ratings here, Debbie Stabenow won by about 7, likely, if not safe, for the Democratic Party. So coming into, assessing that and understanding the dynamics of the 2018 elections versus 2026, Democrats are in a far worse position right now in Michigan. And it might be, shockingly, one of the closest races because an independent mayor of a blue city and formerly blue mayor decided he wanted to run. Now, I don't know what Mike Duggan's long game is. There's a chance he drops out before the election if there's no viable pathway to win the governorship. He didn't announce believing that he would lose this race from the get-go. But the data doesn't tell him that he's going to win. If anything, it shows him as a clear-cut spoiler. And so this is where my speculation comes in. No indication this is the exact case, but if I was to game this out with someone, and, we were talking about a separate state, maybe it's possible that Mike Duggan is looking to be an appointed position in whatever administration comes in, at Benson, Gilchrist administration, whoever it is. There also is the possibility that, Mike Duggan is gunning for lieutenant governor on either side of the aisle. Because here's the thing. You combine the vote share of those who are voting for Mike Duggan and whoever else, Democrat or Republican, that candidate wins by a lot. And I think that he knows that he has an electoral pool in a huge Democratic vote sink. And without it, Democrats have a much trickier pathway to victory. Is it possible based off 2022? Yes, it is possible. If you pull away, again, this is very rare that stuff like this happens. But let's say you pull away Wayne County, where, for instance, Gretchen Whitmer won by 277,000 votes on net over Tudor Dixon. Pull it away, reduce that. Tudor Dixon still loses. Republicans still lose. And so even without, victory in, a Democratic county, even without victory in this overwhelming Democratic area, there is a viable pathway forward, which is all to say that Mike Duggan doesn't really have a viable pathway forward. But it does make things tremendously more difficult. And although Jocelyn Benson, who stands to be again as this Democratic frontrunner and in a good position, is electorally strong, has a track record that is proven and tested, that I think could perform very well in a head-to-head, she may not be facing up against a head-to-head. And Michigan's governor race might be shockingly and surprisingly way more competitive than Democrats would have hoped for. And it might be a sleeper state in the 2026 elections, just as the Senate race, I believe, has earned that distinction, even though it really should not have been, especially given the dynamics of the midterm cycle we are about to embark on. So Michigan, Senate race, governor's race, fascinating to say the least. Toss-ups, nonetheless, and Democrats are expecting that they do well in the state, but it'll be a lot harder than it was in 2018, and that will be the big challenge for Democrats as they look to the next midterm cycle and victories in states they might have been expecting them, but will have to fight 10 times harder than 6 years ago. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch and then a playlist for my 2026 governor election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.